Thank you for tuning in to This Automation Life, brought to you by Brenner-Fiedler. I'm your host, Jeremy Schubert. Each week, we discuss technologies used in automation. This week, Dave Connaughton from Parker Balston is here to discuss nitrogen generators used in the food industry. Thanks for joining us today, Dave.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, we've talked about nitrogen generators before. In general, where is nitrogen used in food manufacturing or in the food machinery?
There is a lot of nitrogen used in the food industry. Nitrogen is really desirable to come in contact with food because it's inert, so it's not going to change the color or flavor or aroma of the food that it comes in contact with. And it also prevents the growth of bacteria. So packaging of foods is a common application. There's another, nitrogen is also used for blanketing oils, say edible oils, in the process to prevent rancidity. Oxygen contamination will cause rancidity. But anywhere you need to extend shelf life, preserve flavor, taste, color, those are important places to use nitrogen.
Okay.
Coffee, snack food packaging, meat packaging, lettuce packaging, wine handling and packaging, moving wine around a winery, and there's certainly many more than that.
Wow. So realistically, all over. I mean, it makes sense. You remove the oxygen, no bacteria, no oxidation. All sounds good. So most people are using nitrogen someplace if they're making food and they know where they're using it and they know what they're doing with it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exact. Oh, yes. Usually they have people on staff that have a pretty good idea well, modified atmospheric packaging is kind of the buzzword, and that can be either, relatively high purity nitrogen, or it could be a mixture of nitrogen and CO2, depending on what
Hmm.
type of bacterial life you want to prevent.
Hmm.
If it was pure nitrogen, there could be an opportunity for anaerobic bacteria to grow. So sometimes they mix in a little CO2 to prevent that. But oftentimes it's used just to preserve flavor, freshness, taste, aroma.
Cool. So, before we talked about purity levels of nitrogen, is there a typical purity level used in the food industry? Is it different on different types of foods? What are they kind of looking at?
Well, that's a great question, and some customers are more demanding than others, and sometimes more demanding than they really need to be, because it doesn't usually pay to get a higher purity than what you need. That said, we always defer to the customer on what purity they need, but in general, this is what we've found. Coffee packaging, where you want to save the flavor and aroma of coffee, typically 99 to 99.5% purity.
Okay.
Wine, 98 to 99.9% purity.
Wow.
Cheese is typically around 90, 99.5. Yogurt has probably the biggest range, 95 to 98% purity we've seen. Snack foods, 95% to 99%. Pet foods, oftentimes 99%. And what they'll do, or what food companies will do, is they'll run their process and actually probe their packaging with an oxygen meter, and just to determine what the end purity is inside their package. And they have a specification usually built around that.
Interesting. Okay, so they've done some work to already find these numbers, and this is where you're seeing it, your
Hmm.
land. Cool.
Yeah.
Is there before when we talked in the overview, we talked about PSA, we talked about membrane. Is there a technology that's more used in food um, or not?
Really, both technologies are used. It comes down to what purity you need.
Okay.
And uh, 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 if you're less than 98%, usually people will pick a membrane technology. If they're above 98%, PSA makes a little bit more sense. It uses a little bit less compressed air than a membrane does at those purities.
Okay. That makes sense. Less compressed air, less electricity, less cost. Makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah, less operating costs.
So what benefits would a food manufacturer get from using a nitrogen generator over the tanks or dewars or trucked in bulk that we talked about before?
Well, getting it trucked in typically costs more over over time than it does to generate your own nitrogen. So there's less costs involved. Typically, when the customer is considering our product, uh, we're under a 2-year payback, sometimes even less. 1 year I've seen 6 month paybacks, and there's more convenience. The nitrogen is always there, um, ready to be used. So if it's a situation where you use it seasonally, then obviously a nitrogen generator is a much better way to go. Adding more shifts does not cost any more money. So if a site needs to add a different shift, since we create nitrogen on demand every hour, if you add another hour, you just leave the equipment on, the nitrogen generator on for that extra hour, and you can create more nitrogen. Whereas if you were getting it delivered, you'd have to get another delivery to support your extra shift. And then there's the green aspects of making your own nitrogen. You're not relying on this giant industrial plant that liquefies nitrogen at minus 320 degrees, and you're not relying on trucks going over the road, uh, burning fossil fuels to creating their own carbon footprint. So it does make sense from an energy standpoint to make it on your own.
Gotcha. And then are there any safety or government regulations that generating nitrogen can help you meet?
I'm not aware of any government regulations, but usually safety officers at plants are very concerned about the need to transport these heavy cylinders in some cases, or a potential exposure to cold liquid nitrogen, which can
Oh
cause
yeah.
um, with the volume of liquid nitrogen that you have on site. I mean, there could be areas where or a leak could in a small area could cause asphyxiation if a person went into that area and didn't realize that there was no oxygen in that area. So
Wow.
that's something that safety officers at plants consider.
So there's the potential for, enough nitrogen leaking from, I don't know, vent or exhaust out of your liquid nitrogen tank that it basically pushes the oxygen out of an area and and makes it difficult to breathe. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Wow.
It could happen. Um, it's not typical, but I mean, it's not common, but
Yeah.
it's certainly a consideration. And if a fire department comes to fight a fire, they have to be cognizant of the fact of all the chemicals that they have on site. Whereas if you just have a nitrogen generator, it's a low pressure gas, low compared to either a high pressure cylinder or even a liquid nitrogen, and it reduces it eliminates one other thing in your plant that you have to worry about from a safety standpoint.
Wow. Cool. Well, very interesting. It's always good to hear, once we know about these things, well, how do I use it for what I'm doing? So it's good to put, the nitrogen generator in place with the food industry. We thank you for that, Dave, and always good to have you as a guest on here.
Thank you very much. It's an exciting thing that you're doing, and I'm pleased to be part of the podcast.
No problem. So thanks to our guest, Dave Connaughton with Parker Balston, and thanks very much for joining us and listening to Brenner-Fiedler's This Automation Life. If you have questions about what you just heard, or if you have a topic you'd like to hear discussed, please email us at tech@brfa.com. That's TECH at brfa.com. And be sure to continue tuning in each week.